Conference from Governor Cuomo right now, addressing the situation out there across the tri-state area, and of course here in New York. And let's listen in.
State Operations. To my right, Mr. Joseph Lhota, Chairman of the MTA, and to his right, Roger Perino, who is the Commissioner of the New York State Department of Homeland Security. As everybody knows, we have a snowstorm. But it's a snowstorm plus, let's call it, and we're going to be declaring a state of emergency because the situation has continued to deteriorate. We're going to have a state of emergency for the entire downstate region, starting Westchester South and Long Island. In terms of the snowfall, the predictions have increased, where we believe there will be more snow, up to 6 to 10 inches in New York City, 9 to 12 inches on Long Island, 4 to 8 in Westchester. The storm is tracking heavier towards the east, so New York City, Nassau, Suffolk, the heaviest on the current track of the storm. I say snowstorm plus because snow is one thing. We can handle snow. It's snow plus the wind, which is going to cause the trouble today. The wind is going to be high all throughout the day, 25 to 35 miles per hour, higher on Long Island. Gusts up to 60 miles per hour. Those are significant wind gusts, again, primarily on Long Island, but some in New York City. Worse as you go east, so Queens will be worse than Manhattan, Suffolk worse than Nassau. The wind compounds the problem because snow is one thing. Snow with 60-mile-per-hour gusts of wind are a totally different situation to deal with. It's almost impossible to clear roads when you have those high wind gusts, because as soon as you clear the road, the wind literally just brings the snow back across the road. We expect the wind to be picking up in the later hours, and the late afternoon rush hour to be more problematic than the morning rush hour. And that's why the situation is somewhat deceptive. People drove into work today, and they experienced one situation, which was not pleasant, but was doable. The situation will deteriorate through the day, and the afternoon and evening rush hour we expect to be worse, especially on Long Island. We have had this situation before where people come to work and they expect the situation to remain constant through the day, but the situation deteriorates, and then come rush hour, the situation is especially problematic. Our concern is more at this point for Long Island. The Long Island Expressway, given the configuration of Long Island, it is an island. It's off the water. The wind off the water on Long Island, which is a narrow strip of land, creates mayhem. We've had frightening situations on the Long Island Expressway. We've had people stranded on the LIE overnight, and it has literally become a significant issue of public safety. It's become an issue of life and death. And when you have people stranded on the LIE, that situation is very serious. Trying to get to them in those wind gusts. As soon as 1 or 2 cars get stuck on a road, you can no longer clear that road because the plows can't get past the stuck cars. So there's a very quick spiral into chaos. And that's what we're concerned about. We have done everything that we can do In terms of preparing for the storm, this is not our first rodeo. The storms have been getting worse. Extreme weather is a reality. We're seeing storms of a severity that we've never seen before. We have made significant changes over the years. We've acquired much more emergency equipment than we ever had before. We now have more plows, more heavy-duty equipment. We have more personnel. In this storm, as you'll hear, we have thousands of people deployed and thousands of pieces of equipment deployed. We brought equipment from other parts of the state to assist in downstate. We have now mobile deployment fleets. So when there's a problem upstate, we can shift to upstate. When there's a problem downstate, we can shift to downstate. And that's what we've done here. The MTA is no stranger to these situations. They took precautions over the past several days, knowing the storm was coming. They stored trains. They have all sorts of sophisticated equipment. But then again, at the end of the day, you're dealing with trains that travel on tracks. Some of those tracks are exposed to snow. They have electrical components. It's cold. It's frigid. And mechanical situations, mechanical systems tend to break down. So it's not even a question of preparedness at one point. Mother Nature can bring a severity that is beyond your control, period. Same thing with clearing of the roads for the Department of Transportation. Same thing with the Port Authority. You have runways. The runways have to be clear. If the runways are not clear, you now have a danger for air travel. And we have a constant balance that we're trying to weigh between keeping everything open, so businesses are open and people are going to work and the economy is running. On the other side of the scale is public safety. And you don't want to bring out the public in situations where there could be danger to human life. Somebody said to me this morning, well, it can't be that bad because you didn't close the roads and you didn't close the subway. There have been situations where we have closed the subway and closed the roads. Those are extreme situations. Those are situations where the threat to public safety overwhelms the damage to the economy by closing down the subway and the road system. That does not mean because the roads and the trains are running that it is a situation that is especially safe or easy. This state of emergency means unless it is essential for you to be out on the roads and moving around today, you should not be. And it becomes a question of common sense for New Yorkers. If there is something you have to do today and you have no viable alternative, then you should know you are putting yourself in a situation of risk and other people in a situation of risk. One car gets stuck on the roads, as I mentioned before, you make it virtually impossible to clear those roads. One accident, you now need an ambulance, you need a police car, and you subject all those people to danger. So common sense, err on the side of caution. The situation is going to get worse as the day goes on. It's going to get worse the further east we go. With that, I'll turn it over first to Mr. Rick Cotton to talk about the Port Authority, and then we'll go from there. Rick?
Thank you, Governor. Good morning. All of the region's airports, JFK, LaGuardia, and Newark, are open, but they are operating at highly restricted flight capacity. But there are very, very significant flight cancellations. 2/3 of all flights across the 3 airports have been canceled. It varies by airport. At LaGuardia, 95% of flights have been canceled. At Newark, 70% of flights have been canceled. And at JFK, just under 27% of flights have been canceled. All 3 airports are at their highest level of staffing and at their highest level of snow alert. There are thousands of tons of salt and sand have been stockpiled at each of the airports. High levels of staffing are now in effect. At JFK, more than 270 staff are totally devoted to snow clearance and emergency activities. More than 100 at LaGuardia and more than 100 at Newark. With respect to bridges and tunnels, driving conditions are extremely hazardous. Speed restrictions have been imposed, 25 miles an hour at the Staten Island crossings, 35 miles an hour at the George Washington Bridge. Again, staffing is at the highest alert level. More than 100 pieces of snow removal equipment is in operation, and stockpiles in advance have been put in place with respect to sand and salt. Buses, long-distance buses, there are a heavy number of cancellations. Virtually all buses to the south have been canceled, and everyone should check with their carrier in terms of buses headed to other destinations. With respect to PATH is operating normally overnight. Preventive conditions have been put into effect so that switches, third rail, have been heated. Anti-freeze trains have been running, and at this moment, all of the PATH trains are operating near or close to schedule. Once again, the highest levels of staffing are in place with respect to snow removal, both in terms of the tracks and with respect to the stations.
Thank you, Mr. Cotton. We'll ask Joe Lhota, Chairman of the MTA, for an update.
Thank you, Governor. As the Governor mentioned, we began our preparations last night, and we've done this before, and successfully last night we were able to get an enormous amount of our equipment underground, which resulted in most people seeing a slowdown in the number of express trains that we had, but we were fully running our normal service, and we will continue to do that throughout the day. We've got on the, as was mentioned in the Port Authority's case, we also have switch heaters as well as third rail heaters out there for all of our systems, including both underground and above ground. Regarding our buses, we've got 2,000 buses that are currently operating with chains on them. You'll see less articulated buses. You'll still see some. Those are the larger buses that bend in the middle because they're not, during an icy situation, they're not overly the right thing to have on the road. So you will see a little bit less number of bus service going on, but still continue to see it running. Look, to protect the fleet from any further icy conditions, we will still be housing our assets underground as much as we possibly can. On the Long Island Railroad this morning, we had a successful morning. We had certain scattered delays, but everything was working fine overnight. And this morning we had patrol trains running along the tracks to clear them up, as well as heating the switches all the way across. We currently have a situation out in Farmingdale right now where a patrol train is on the side of a track, not at all impacting any of our regular revenue service that's going on, and it's on the side, and it's been disabled. It'll be fixed in time for our rush hour. Metro North is also working. We've got a full complement of employees up there. We're having a wind situation on the Hudson line, so some of our stations are being bypassed because of trees that have come down. They're being fixed as we speak. In addition to that, I encourage everyone to look at our website, mta.info, or our various apps, subway time and train time. time to look at the schedules and to see what's going on, because it's changing from moment to moment. But we're fully prepared, and we're doing everything we can to clean up the tracks, clean up the ice, so that we will be have as close to a normal situation on our evening trips as possible. Regarding the bridges and tunnels, as Rick Cotton mentioned, for the Port Authority, we also are having restricted speeds on many of our bridges, and specifically the Verrazano Bridge, our restrictions have gone a little bit deeper and further. We're restricting trucks as well as tractor-trailer trucks and motorcycles from being on the bridge at this time. We're experiencing very, very high winds on that bridge. We're also experiencing high winds on the Henry Hudson Bridge, and we have very restricted traffic speeds going on right there. And then finally, regarding paratransit, for those folks who need the accessible rides and accessible vehicles, we have 1,200 paratransit vehicles that are currently fitted with snow tires and chains. And if you're in the need of that, please call the call center. They'll be able to help you with any paratransit needs. And again, I want to thank our customers this morning for being patient. I also want to thank all of the transit workers and the railroad workers for all the work they've done overnight to prepare us for this. And I would encourage our customers to be safe as you're walking down the steps into the subway, as you're walking up into any of our elevated tracks. Please hold on to the rails. I think it's very important. We've got workers out there cleaning all of our entranceways, but I think it's very important that everybody be as safe as possible as they're going into any part of our system. Thank you.
Thank you. And just to reiterate, this is not a normal snowstorm. There are two weather patterns that have collided. It is snow plus very high gusts of wind, and that changes the situation dramatically. Again, gusts up to 60 miles per hour. That is a serious situation, more serious as you go further east. We have hundreds of pieces of equipment that have been brought down, but there's only so much you can do when you have that kind of wind and snowfall. So diligence, common sense, restraint. I know we're New Yorkers and we're invincible and nothing's going to stop us from doing what we need to do. I get it. I've been on most of the roads in the metropolitan area this morning, and I can tell you it is ugly and it is dangerous and it is slow. So even though we are invincible New Yorkers, a little caution, and if it's unnecessary to go out, today is not the day to be driving around if you really, really don't have to be driving around. Questions?
Is there a specific wind threshold that we might hit that would result in things like bridge closures, transit closures? Any specific number that we might hit?
There could be. It's not just a numeric number, it's where that gust is. But the first warning is trucks would be prohibited from going over crossings. If it got truly significant, we'd have to close a bridge. We don't expect that thus far, but again, it's weather, and weather changes. You should know, as an aside, our weather detection system has also been greatly upgraded. We now have what's called a Mesonet system. I got into a lot of trouble once when I suggested that the weather forecast may not have been totally accurate on a previous storm. And I had a raft of criticism from weather people who took offense. The weather forecasts come from devices that are located that are measuring temperature, barometric pressure, etc. We have put in a new weather detection system with hundreds of points of detection. So we now have a much more accurate forecast of what the weather is doing where, right? We talk about Long Island. There's no weather pattern on Long Island. It's eastern Nassau, central Nassau, western Nassau, it's eastern Suffolk. So we have much more specific weather detection equipment through this Mesonet system. But at this point, It can change. We don't anticipate closing bridges for vehicles. It is very possible that we would close bridges and some highways to trucks. The normal rule of thumb is sustained winds, 50 miles per hour or over, we close the bridges. But we are not now expecting that level of wind on a sustained level. We're talking about gusts up to 60, but that's different than sustained 50-mile-per-hour winds.
Is there any possibility, given the strength of the storm that's expected in Long Island, that you might have to cancel the Long Island Railroad trains or cut that?
We're not expecting that. We're cleaning the rails as we speak, and we continue to keep them clear as well as de-iced and heated. It's our expectation to run as normal a service this afternoon as possible. We believe we'll be able to do that. We did see a significant reduction in volume in the number of folks who came in this morning. We expect to see that same volume back out again.
Governor, you expressed a lot of concern in your State of the State speech yesterday about the homeless. I wonder about your concerns today, as there are still people on the streets in New York City, and we're in a really difficult weather situation.
Well, look, as you pointed out, Marcia, one of the great disappointments for me is the homeless situation in general and the rise in the number of homeless in New York State, especially in our cities. Reason it's especially sad, I started many, many years ago, as you probably read in the history books. When I was in my 20s, I started working for the homeless. And the whole assumption was that it was a temporary situation. Nobody could imagine that you would actually have homeless people on the streets for a long period of time. This was an anomaly. Well, now it's turned out to be a constant situation. When we have situations like today with freezing weather, cities are instructed to take additional precautions and procedures and bring people in for their own good, because their life is at risk. And for a homeless person to be on the streets now, they're putting their own lives in danger. And cities, including this city, have procedures to bring the homeless in sub-freezing weather, certainly today.
So you want to see the homeless take?
Oh, yes. The procedures should be in place to bring all homeless people from the streets into shelters.
Governor, the temperatures are expected to drop considerably this weekend, and I'm wondering if that complicates things or means that there's even more urgency in terms of clearing snow today, tomorrow, because what happens when those temperatures plummet and there's a lot of snow on the ground? What does that mean for the roads and for the transit system as well?
Yes, yes, and yes. The snow is a problem today. The wind plus the snow is a problem today. Temperatures are forecasted to drop dramatically, and that will then compound the first two problems. And when the weather drops, especially for a situation like the MTA or the Port Authority, equipment starts to freeze, you can't clear the track, electric signals literally freeze. Plus, there's a practical reality to this. You have a power outage. There's snow, there's wind, there's frigid temperatures. It makes it harder for the repair crews to get there to do the actual work. So that would be a compounding negative on all of this. Joe, you want to add anything on that, or Rick?
We have, as Rick has mentioned, and I mentioned as well, the number of switch heaters we have out there, as well as third rail. We have 1,600 third rail heaters right now and working, and we're going to continue to see them working throughout the next couple of days to prevent any particular slowdown. We've been de-icing the rail and the tracks, and then the biggest concern I have is for the elevated part of the subway system, basically in the northern part of the Bronx or out in the Rockaways, and that's why I encourage everybody to look at look at mta.info on our website to look and see if there are any delays going on. And also, we've been we're prepared if necessary to have buses to be put in place to help folks along anywhere along the way where there are any impairments.
But Grace, I talk about common sense because there's no mystery here, right? You look at the train system. They are metal tracks with boxes that have electrical equipment in them that are exposed to the elements. Well, we have track heaters and switch heaters, etc. Yes, but when you have snow and wind and frigid temperatures, those systems break down. They're just electrical systems. In the case of the MTA, many of them are old and outdated. And they break down, and that's what causes delays. So that should be anticipated.
What exactly does the state of emergency mean? Does it give the state extra powers? Can you tow people? What can you do?
State of emergency gives the state exactly that. Emergency power for it basically waives regulations and gives us ability to do things that we couldn't do without regulatory approval or legislative change. We can contract directly. We can deploy personnel directly. We can move equipment from one place to another. It gives us additional authority over local governments. We can override local governments' rules and regulations. In the past, under an emergency order, we've put in place the same travel ban for the entire metropolitan area, for example. Otherwise, you have Nassau decides one policy, Suffolk decides one policy, New York City decides one policy. That doesn't really work because if you're allowed to drive in Nassau, but you're not allowed to drive in Suffolk, what does that mean? Everyone's going to stop at the Suffolk border, or everyone's going to stop at the Queens Midtown Tunnel? So in situations like that, where it's not practical to allow one locality to make these decisions, the emergency order allows us to override the locality's decision-making and put in place a uniform travel ban, travel conditions, etc.
The governor announcing a state of emergency for the southern tier portion of New York State. We're just hearing those details.
Yeah, but the LIE staying open for now. They're going to continue to monitoring that. And, of course, LIRR still open at this point. So just going to see how the conditions deteriorate if they continue to, as to what they're going to do with that measure. But he called this a storm plus, not just your regular snowstorm, but a snowstorm plus.
Yeah. So